Hello, and welcome to our webinar, The Power of Pop. I'm Mike Jackson, Media Strategist at the Opportunity Agenda, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. The Opportunity Agenda is a social justice communications lab. We work with partners to move hearts and minds toward lasting policy and culture change. Today, we're very glad to be offering a walkthrough presentation of our recent report, The Power of Pop, which outlines dominant stories and themes concerning immigrant characters in television, how these themes are discussed, and provides recommendation on how advocates can help improve these portrayals. So we're joined today by 4 speakers, and I'd like to thank them for their time with us today. They are Lucy Odije Turley, our Public Opinion and Media Research Coordinator and lead researcher on this project. I apologize for the sound of the background. Bassem Kawar, the Advocacy Specialist for the Campaign to Take on Hate. Carl Lipscombe, the Deputy Director of the Deputy Director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And Jenny Yang, a Los Angeles-based writer and stand-up comedian. We'll be taking questions after each speaker, so feel free to enter any questions you have in the questions function of your GoToWebinar toolbar. It should be over there on the right. You can join the conversation online as well by using the hashtag #PowerOfPop or by tweeting us at OPP-agenda. So before I turn it over to Lucy, real quick, I'm almost done, I just want everyone to know that after the webinar, a short evaluation will pop up on your screen. Please take the time to fill that out so we can improve future webinars based on your feedback. So with that, you've heard enough from me. Let's get started. Our first speaker is Lucy. Lucy?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Michael. As Michael says, my name is Lucy Odije Turley. I'm the Public Opinion and Media Research Coordinator here at the Opportunity Agenda. And today I'm going to be talking to you about key findings from our latest report, The Power of Pop. And I'm also going to be presenting some of the best practices that we came up with how you can more effectively engage popular culture and also use popular culture to advance social justice causes. So before I get into the weeds of what we found out, I want to just quickly give you some context and go over what our research questions were going into the project and what our ultimate research goal was. So we were looking to explore what some of the dominant narratives were concerning immigrants, immigrant communities, and related topics as they are currently presented in popular television shows. And the period that we examined was between April 2014 and June 2016. So we wanted to understand what were the common storylines and themes that were emerging and what type of characters or spokespeople are typically represented. We also wanted to understand what the overarching themes, how these overarching themes are being discussed by engaged audiences on social media. And the central goal was to be able to provide advocates with strategies for improving the portrayals of immigrants and also strategies for improving or using popular culture to advance social justice causes and engage new audiences. So how did we do that? So the first step was for us to define what we meant by popular, that the definition that changes and it may differ depending on the person you're asking. So for the purposes of this research project, we defined popular as television shows that had very high audiences when they were first broadcast on cable network television, and also shows that were typically binged watched in like 1 or 2 sittings on streaming services like Netflix. So the reason that we wanted to include streaming services was to really kind of speak to people's changing viewer habits. People aren't necessarily watching television with their families anymore in front of a sofa. You're self-selecting and you're streaming. So we really wanted to speak to those changing viewer habits. So from a total pool of more than 100 episodes, we randomly sampled 40 television episodes for in-depth content analysis. And the reason for our random sampling is we really wanted to break down our entertainment bubbles. As much as I would have loved to watch 40 episodes of Game of Thrones, we really wanted to understand what was out there and what the kind of average American may be consuming. The next step was for us to come up with a criteria. How were we going to know that a show creator was intending for a character to be an immigrant? So we came up with this kind of 2 main criteria in our identification process. So one, when a show was, as we were watching the show, there had to be an explicit reference made to a character with immigrant status or nation of origin in the context of the show or storyline. So that could be through self-identification, or it could be somebody else identifying them as such. Or there were times where it wasn't so explicit, so we also coded where show creators use particular social and cultural markers to differentiate immigrant characters from native-born characters. And so people who want to dive a little bit deeper into the methodology we have a detailed description in the full report. So what did we find out? Our first set of findings pertain to character representation, so the frequency and quality of immigrant character representation. So we found that in the April 2014 to June 2016 television season, identifiable immigrant characters were significantly underrepresented. So as of 2014, the foreign-born population is roughly 13.5% of the US. Now, this number goes up to around 16.9% when you account for the roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the US currently. But we found that only 6% of identifiable immigrants, or characters who are identifiable as immigrants, could be found in leading and minor character roles. So another way to think about it is of the 1,164 characters that were in leading and minor roles in the 40 shows that we watched, only 70 were identifiable as immigrant characters. So that's a significant underrepresentation of immigrants currently. There were significant disparities between the genres. So historical dramas are significantly more likely to have immigrant characters. So you see here that 60% of characters in the historical dramas included in our sample were immigrants. This compares to 9% for sci-fi and fantasies, only 4% in dramas, 3% in comedies, and 2% in horrors. And in action and reality, there were no identifiable immigrant characters. We also found significant disparities between region of origin and the representation of immigrant characters. So you see here, European immigrants, and not just European immigrants, white European immigrants specifically, were overrepresented in television programming. So here we see between 2014 and 2016, 47% of identifiable immigrant characters in the 40 shows that we sampled were European immigrants. Now, if you think about how that actually tallies up to the real, actual representation of European immigrants in the US currently, as of 2015, it's only 11% of European immigrants of all races. There's a significant overrepresentation. We see here that the overrepresentation of European immigrants is also coincides with a significant underrepresentation of East and South Asian and Latino immigrants. So as of 2015, 45% of foreign-born nationals in the US self-identify as Latino and Hispanic, yet only 11% of immigrant characters in our sample were identifiable as Latino immigrants. And this is even less so for East Asian and South Asian immigrants. African immigrants and Middle Eastern immigrants, their rate of representation in the shows that we sampled is more in line with their current demographics in the US. So we weren't just interested in the frequency of immigrant character representation, but we also wanted to know about the quality and the depth. So when immigrant characters are present, what types of roles do they typically occupy? So we have this scale that we created. So there are different types of roles that we wanted to analyze. So were immigrant characters cast in leading regular roles? So are they a central cast member, core to the storyline? So you could think about the show protagonist. Were they cast in leading recurring roles? So they're a regular, highly featured character, but they're not necessarily a core member of the cast. Were they cast in leading non-recurring roles? They were heavily featured, but maybe in a single episode or two. They weren't in every single episode. Minor recurring roles, so were they featured, but maybe in a multiple episodes within a season, but just not a core member. And in minor non-recurring roles. So these are the characters who are maybe featured once or twice in a season. So we found something positive, that when immigrant characters are present, they are more likely to occupy leading regular or leading recurring roles. So they have a real depth of representation. So 56% of immigrant characters in our sample were cast in leading regular or leading recurring roles, 4% leading non-recurring, 26% minor non-recurring roles, and 14% minor recurring roles. Now again, there's significant disparities between region of origin and racial and ethnic groups. So again, you see that white immigrants are significantly more likely to not only be present, but also be cast in leading recurring roles. So here you see that compared to Latino immigrants, white immigrants, 67% to be exact, were casting leading recurring roles, and this compares to just 11% of Latino immigrants. So the next set of findings relates to the dominant storylines and themes associated with immigrant characters within our sample. So as you heard before, historical dramas were more likely to have immigrant characters. And this may be because a significant portion of storylines that featured immigrant characters, 33% in our sample, focused on historic immigration, specifically European colonialism and European migration. And so a really important question is whether or not audiences are making the connection between this historic European immigration and contemporary immigration. We can't be sure, but shows like Turn Watching to Spy, Vikings, you know, that is it's a place where immigration is being represented in ways that maybe audiences are not necessarily connecting the dots to immigration. More troubling finding is that 25% of storylines which featured an immigrant character also featured a storyline that focused on crime. So either an immigrant committing or being a victim of crime. So this was included scenes where they were being questioned by police, scenes where immigrants were incarcerated, and this was particularly true for cop dramas. And once again, we see significant disparities between racial and ethnic groups. Here, Latino immigrants are significantly more likely to be tied to storylines about crime and depicted committing unlawful acts. So in our sample, 50% of Latino immigrants were represented committing an unlawful act. 38% were depicted as incarcerated. This was 33% for Black immigrants, 25% for Middle Eastern, and just 9% for white immigrants in our sample. There was happy news. We found that 22% of storylines featuring an immigrant character focused on the everyday lives of immigrants and touched on the issue of discrimination. And this was particularly true within the genre of comedy and comedy dramas. And this is a space that we found where discrimination against immigrants and xenophobia is being challenged through humor and satire. And one of our findings is that not only did they typically focus comedies and comedy dramas on the everyday lives of immigrants and potentially issues of discrimination, but they featured an immigrant character in a leading role. So they were able to kind of build that depth of storytelling and touch on these very kind of individualized but kind of systemic issues that immigrant communities face. So you see here this quote from Raj: "With your American accent, everything you say sounds stupid, and my unbiased opinion is this is quite amusing." So what do you do with all of this information I just threw at you? So we've come up with some recommendations, some best practices for how you can effectively challenge and reframe some of these kind of more troubling trends that we've seen in immigrant character representation, but also more effectively engage with popular entertainment and fans of these shows. So the first recommendation is to uplift nuanced portrayals of immigrants in popular entertainment. And this can mean just giving positive reinforcement for portrayals that are already out there. We have Aziz Ansari's Master of None, Eddie Huang's Fresh Off the Boat. So there's already shows out there that are really kind of uplifting fuller, more accurate stories of immigrants and immigrant communities and immigrants' families. So we need to kind of give credit where it's due. So maybe start a hashtag for fans, or we can model what other organizations like GLAAD are doing by presenting networks and individuals who are really using their platform to tell these compelling stories and awarding them for their work. So GLAAD has their annual media award, and here at the Opportunity Agenda, we have our annual Creative Change Award. You can also write blogs highlighting the importance of this new type of storytelling and the need for these authentic voices, or host screening parties, film festivals, or exhibits as a way to educate audiences on the importance of powerful and nuanced representation of immigrant communities. 2 is to challenge and reframe negative portrayals of immigrants in popular entertainment when we see them. So, you know, there's many times where we're watching a show and we see something that we know is perpetuating a really negative and dangerous stereotype. And it is our responsibility as social justice advocates to call this out. So we need to respond in a timely manner. And you can, again, create your own hashtag or meme to draw attention to a really problematic representation. So a great example is Oscar So Right and the more recent No Confederate started by April Rain, both hashtags that started national debate about not only the need for more representation of people of color in general, but for us to challenge really kind of problematic representations that can perpetuate racism and xenophobia. We need to educate audiences about what it is they're seeing. So doing research like this to identify these trends so we know what's out there. Also let people know why these things are problematic so they can be more educated media consumers. And again, we need to hold networks and executives accountable, just like we saw with No Confederate. This can be done. We have the power of social media to really kind of push for the type of representations that we want. And we have to activate engaged fans. They are very, very vocal audiences online who are willing to take to social media to push for more authentic representation. And finally, we can use storylines of popular cultures to frame our issues. So we can build off trends like No Confederate, or we can use popular culture references to engage new audiences. So if you know that you have a particular group of people who love watching Scandal and Olivia, being able to use this character as a way to reach new audiences, but also to frame your particular issue that you want to talk about, or even use the particular actor who may be an advocate for social justice issues, is a really great way of using popular culture references as a tool for explaining really difficult concepts or things, or framing a conversation in a way that's more likely to engage new audiences. And again, blog about it. There's issues in shows that are dealt with everyday issues in comedies, like I just mentioned, about discrimination and about xenophobia. And we can use these, again, to educate audiences on why storytelling is so important to the advancement of social justice causes. So I'm going to leave it there. For those of you who want to take a deeper dive, The Power of Pop, Media Analysis of Immigrant Representation in Popular TV Shows is available on our website, opportunityagenda.org. If you have questions about our methodology, please feel free to email me at luciodg@opportunityagenda.org. I look forward to your questions. I'm going to turn it back to you, Michael.
Lucy, thank you so very much for that great presentation. So, yeah, we've heard all this information, right, concerning dominant stories and themes and television concerning immigrant characters, but of course these stories have real-world applications and implications. So I'd like to take this time to sort of open up this webinar to questions from our speakers. I'm also going to remind everyone that we're taking questions, so feel free to enter the questions that you have into the questions function. But I want to sort of throw our first question over to Carl. Carl, it's important, clearly, to have television shows that embody nuanced and authentic representations of immigrants, but sometimes the industry's attempts at positive representation don't get it right either. So I'm wondering, in what ways do you think shows accidentally reinforce stereotypes in their attempts at positive representation, and what impacts do they have?
Thank you, Michael, and thanks so much for having me. So you're right, Hollywood has made tremendous strides when it comes to diversity in terms of the types of narratives portrayed and casting of immigrants, and just in general portrayal of immigrant characters. Unfortunately, where Hollywood is lacking is when it comes to the nuances of positive representation. Oftentimes, the positive portrayals of immigrants that we see are as either high achievers, business owners, actors, doctors, lawyers, the class valedictorian, etc., or sympathetic characters that need to be saved, that are the victims. The members of my organization, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, are both Black immigrants, but also African Americans. And when we talk to them about the way that immigrants are portrayed in the media and the way that they're portrayed, they tell us that many times, Hollywood sees as positive portrayals are often seen and used as dog whistles against Black people in the U.S. who are stereotyped as lazy, uneducated, poor, criminals, or unsympathetic. And this parallels the actual portrayal of Black immigrants in the media. Oftentimes, we see Black immigrants portrayed as gang members or some sort of involved in some sort of criminal activity. Second, these positive portrayals also set an unfair standard for immigrants across the board. They support the argument that immigrants that are good immigrants, that are starting businesses and getting stellar grades, are the ones that we want in the U.S., and that other immigrants that live less than perfect lives, are unworthy of definitely of attention, and of being portrayed in the media, but also of just existing in the U.S. and in our communities. So those are a couple of ways. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bassem, I'm curious. You're an advocate for the Take on Hate campaign, which aims to challenge, the growing discrimination and persistent misconception of Arab and Muslim Americans. So, what role do you think the entertainment media plays in shaping current attitudes toward Muslim and Arab communities?
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for having me as well.
Sure.
I think it is crucial and important to understand the role that popular portrayals of Arabs and Muslims has played not only in shaping the current attitudes, but making ongoing U.S. wars, racial profiling of our community acceptable to the general public. I mean, we've seen shows, blockbuster TV shows like Homeland, 24, and CIS, and also award-nominated films like Zero Dark 30, American Sniper, that have built an implicit association between Muslims, Arabs, and threats of violence and terrorism. So these anti-Arab tropes generally operate in two ways. First, there are the representations of Arabs and Muslims as an inherently suspect and foreign enemy. I mean, how many times have we sat through a film or an episode of TV where the only character who looks like us is later revealed to be like the Muslim radical fanatic who is determined to destroy the civilized Western way of life, almost always for religious reasons. This version actually of the anti-Muslim trope is an extension of decades of U.S. foreign policy that was heavily built upon the claim that Muslims and Arabs could never be trusted, and that their societies must therefore be destroyed and replaced by something a lot more civilized. And then the second version of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab racism in entertainment media is more refined, and it's actually more designed to appeal to sort of the liberal, more progressive-leaning Americans who might even see through and reject the most straightforward racist narratives that we just mentioned. But in this second mode, though, Muslims and Arabs are presented not necessarily as terrorists, but as culturally backward and ideologically reactionary, a result we are led to believe of their religious intensity and what folks claim to be like, religious radicalization. Some examples of this anti-Muslim and anti-Arab racism are films like The Big Sick, where the entire dramatic arc of the film is driven by the clash between a supposedly backwards culture of arranged marriages and religious faith, and then the American dream of true love and personal freedom. Another example that we could mention is Shameless, where a young gay character confronts the fact that his partner is unable to be open about their relationship because his family is Muslim. In this case, the tension driving the character's storyline is the apparent backwardness and oppressiveness of his partner's Muslim faith, rather than his own poverty or even the anti-gay sentiment within his own family. I mean, the foreign policy effect to this particular version of presenting Islam as backward is easily seen also in Amnesty International's notorious poster campaign calling for public support of the NATO invasion of Afghanistan. I mean, the poster that we're questioning here featured women in hijab accompanied by text suggesting the NATO involvement was the best way to promote women's rights by liberating them from their own oppressive governments and societies. Now, when we think about the causes of these pervasive and racist portrayals of our community in popular entertainment, folks have suggested a number of possible reasons. We know, like for an example, that Muslims and Arabs have been kept out of the film industry. We can come up with plenty of examples where Arab and Muslim professionals have been skipped over acting and production roles. This stark fact was actually made more apparent when, as many of us remembers, the stereotypical show Homeland included a shot of Arabic language graffiti, which read, "Homeland is racist," in the backdrop of one of the scenes. You know, this TV show's production team didn't include a single Arabic speaker. And remember that this is a TV show that takes the Arab and Muslim communities as its subject matter. So they had to hire outside help to decorate their sets. As a result, an incredibly clever set designer snuck the words in. Nobody even realized that. So as we explore the importance of representation and ways to challenge this narrative and trying to get Hollywood to tell better, less racist stories about us, I would also suggest that we explore the topic from a different lens as well. The reason I say all of this, because I don't think that the media portrayals of our community is the main cause of the problem. These films and TV representations of us serve to make it easier for U.S. government to harass, racially profile our communities locally, but more kind of like the broad picture is to declare those wars and bomb our people overseas. You know, reading these racist portrayals as a peril to the country's long-standing foreign policy and domestic law enforcement programs. You know, the media in Hollywood are complicit in the continuation of U.S. wars in our homelands because multinational corporations that own specific media institutions and Hollywood production houses benefit economically from continued war, occupation, and exploitation of our people. So in closing, I would just like to challenge folks to continue having those conversations similar to the one that we're having right now, with sort of the understanding and the focus on the real material reasons for the media's racist deception of our people and overall communities of color.
That's fantastic, Bassem. Thank you very much. Carl and Jenny, I'm curious. Do either one of you have any follow-ups or any comments you wanna make to what Bassem was mentioning? I serve Homeland myself, so Bassem, I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Carl, did you have more to say? This is Jenny.
You can go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I was just thinking, wow, Bassem and Carl have been dropping some serious knowledge. Like, we need to just like process that, because I feel like so much of what I'm taking away from what they just said is that, like, you know, like Carl is saying, we need to have more nuanced portrayals, because like most stereotypes that dog us as non-majority people, non-people of power in America, we always are either, you know, saints or victims, you know, and I think anything that's creates more nuance is better. And I think it's so real what Bassem's talking about is that, like, you know, everyone who's listening right now who represent communities, you know, other smart folks, like, we have the power to really raise the critical media literacy of our communities and of you know, maybe hopefully mainstream audiences. So I think the more we can really highlight, oh, do you see that this storyline frames our community in a certain way, and just raising that level of awareness, I think it's better for all of us, you know. I just feel like, you know, for us to just, I think it's really easy in America to just, I do this all the time. Like, I turn off my brain and I watch The Bachelorette and I'm like, yeah. But, you know, for us, it helps for us if everyone raises their critical mind when we're consuming media.
Yeah. Anyone? Bassem? Carl? I have a question for Jenny, but I want to let the speakers speak first.
Sure. I mean, I would just add one thing. I think that it's, you know, one thing that you know, that struck me with what Bassem said is that Hollywood isn't per se the, you know, the problem or the only problem. The bigger problem is that these portrayals, these, you know, portraying all Muslims as stereotypes or portraying Black immigrants as these gang members and whatnot, these shows actually they're profitable. And, you know, that means that someone is willing to purchase ads in order to make these television shows happen. And so I think that, you know, I would point to the profitability model of these stereotypes of immigrants as also being fundamental to the problem. And, you know, I think there's it leads to a broader question of whether Hollywood is willing to forego profit in order to actually, you know, help produce cultural change and shift the narrative around immigrants.
Yeah, no, I understand. Jenny, I have a question for you too, really, and then I sort of want to open up the second question to the rest of the panelists. So one of the key findings, right, of the research is that comedies are a space where racial and ethnic stereotypes are being challenged through humor and satire. But what do you think why do you think comedy has sort of emerged, right, as this transformative space? Why comedy, and what role do you think comedy can play in, I hate to say this, but in the current political climate?
Yes, the current political climate. I used to work in the labor movement before I became a comedian and pursued entertainment. I used to work for the Service Employees International Union, and that was what I thought I was going to do, which is be the most effective in social change via the labor movement. Now, what I realize is I have too loud of a mouth and I'm too silly to stay in the labor movement. And so I became a comedian. And I think what's powerful for me as a comedian and a creator is that comedy is a way to short circuit people's logic. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, I used to write policy papers. I used to prepare spokespeople to give public testimony, in a very serious way. And so I know what that racket is, and it's so important. But I think there is also a role for humor in really connecting with people as human beings without having to go through their logic, which we all know as people who are trying to move the needle in social change. Logic all of this makes so much sense to us logically. But I think sometimes if we do want to move mass audiences, we need to use everything at our disposal. And that includes the tool of humor and emotion. And so storytelling, especially through the sort of visceral tool of comedy, which is really, highlighting hypocrisy, highlighting disjunctures, highlighting inconsistencies. It's actually a very powerful rhetorical tool to get our points across. And I think that's what's really awesome about comedy. Now, on the side of creators in Hollywood, I think I'm not surprised that comedy has arisen as a place where maybe more nuanced or everyday portrayals of immigrants has happened. I think for me, there's been if you think about the political economy and the economy of media in recent years, technology and the increase of platforms has forced a lot of these media buyers and producers to invest in more varied voices, more voices. They need content. That literally, that's why we're seeing much more diversity. And a lot of times comedy is the entry point for a lot of creators, honestly, who are immigrants or people of color. For example, even Kelly Marie Tran, who is actually someone in our Asian American comedy community in Los Angeles, she's going to be starring in Star Wars, in the next Star Wars movie. When she started out not too long ago, she's this sort of like, round-faced, adorable, young-looking, black-haired Asian, East Asian or Vietnamese American. She was pursuing drama, but because of her quote unquote quirky looks, which is oftentimes code for not looking like some 60-pound white ingenue, she was kind of pigeonholed into comedy. And honestly, that's what happens a lot for non-white, non-able-bodied or non-fitting a certain size type of human in Hollywood. And I think that happens a lot. And so comedy becomes sort of the career entry point a lot of times for folks. And that's why I'm not surprised people like Nanachka Khan, who does Fresh Off the Boat, Cristela Alonso, they're the ones who could probably very capably write or perform drama, but they come up through comedy. And that's why we get some of those portrayals. Now, on the audience side, and I'll wrap up my answer real quick. On the audience side, I think what's lovely about comedy is it's the easy thing where people who want to relax and relieve some tension and watch. And I think that's why it's so powerful that given these times, and since forever, satire, political satire, late night shows, The Daily Show, other shows have become such a great outlet for America to laugh about things that are really pretty awful. And I think as advocates, as people who care about social justice and immigrants, as nonprofit professionals, NGOs, I think there's also a role for comedy for folks to actually use the power of comedy, the power of highlighting disjunctures and inconsistencies and hypocrisies to connect with people. So those are my sort of reactions to why comedy is so useful.
Thank you. Carl, Bassem, any comment? Jenny, I have a question. You were talking about being pigeonholed in comedy. Is that a danger? I guess if you're a performer or an actor and you end up being pigeonholed in comedy, is that a danger if you want to switch to drama, or are you just sort of in one genre permanently? And do you see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think it was definitely more of a danger even just 5 years ago. But if you think about how we've all started to consume, TV shows, whether that's binging on Netflix or Hulu, we have this sort of on-demand culture. We have YouTube and all of these digital platforms. There's been such an increase in content. There has been more diversity, so to speak. But I think as an actor, not too long ago, or a performer, there was a lot of pigeonholing. Right now, if you think about it, there's been a growth of dramedies, right? If you think about it, there, that the lines between comedy and drama have started to blur. So, and there've been more sort of high concept comedies, what have you. And so that's actually allowed some comedic performers who have the acting chops to actually go into do more dramatic work. But maybe even before 3 to 5 years ago, there wasn't a lot of that. So if you're a Tom Hanks, remember when Tom Hanks was just a comedic performer? That took forever. It took forever for him to finally, show that he could be a dramatic performer. And that happened, relatively not too long ago, fairly later, much later in his career. And so, but because of the current environment, I think there's a little more of a porous boundary between comedy and drama these days.
Well, yeah, thank you. I have a question from the listeners, and I want to open up to all three of you guys. We were talking about comedy. I kind of want to talk about theater for just a second. So what lessons do you think the television industry can learn from the Broadway and theater industry, where immigrant and race is often irrelevant in the casting choices for award-winning shows like Hamilton, for instance?
I mean, can I take a stab at this?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a very important difference when we talk about this type of a question, because a lot of times people like to say, yeah, we love colorblind casting, right? There's a term called colorblind casting, open to all ethnicities. I think as people who care about social justice, I think we need to always keep our critical eye out. It's like any other issue that we get presented with, right? Whenever we hear, let's be colorblind, my little antenna go up, because here's the risk. We can say that everyone is equal, but in reality, we are not, right? We as social justice people accept that there is a hierarchy, that we do operate under systems of oppression. And so that is the same as in theater. So for them to say, be colorblind in casting, say Hamilton, right? Everyone's like, oh, Hamilton's so great. But that was a deliberate intention and choice by Lin-Manuel Miranda to say, we are going to take the people who are brown and cast them in these roles that you typically is white. That's a very deliberate thing. That's not. And so, open ethnicity casting is great, but we need to be mindful of is sometimes you can say it's open ethnicity and they will still cast a white person. Ed Skrein recently, as a Japanese mixed race character in Hellboy in the upcoming movie, it made news because he said, I got this role, but I've heard from the community that it would be very hurtful and against the cause if I got cast in it, even though I'm this white British guy. So I'm going to step down. Now, that's great. Who knows? Maybe they did say, oh yeah, for this Japanese character, let's do open ethnicity, colorblind casting. But more often than not, I have to say, we could talk to more of the theater people, but it ends up going to like white folks sometimes, So yeah. I think it's one thing to say colorblind casting. It's one thing to say, look, theater does this thing, but whether it's theater or Hollywood, this is a real issue in how these sort of words are implemented in practice.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Bassem, Carl, any comment?
I think I would just say that, and this is with my very limited knowledge of television or Broadway, is that it's not clear to me that Broadway doesn't have a problem with immigration or race. I would make the same argument that I did prior as it pertains to television, as it pertains to Broadway, in that, oftentimes immigrants are typecast into certain roles, or, pieces are written for for characters that have certain characteristics. And oftentimes those characteristics don't involve being Black or brown or immigrants or having any sort of accent and whatnot. And then I'd also say that, in many ways, Broadway is less scrutinized than Hollywood. We see a ton of petitions anytime, a show that's anti-immigrant is proposed, or something happens on TV, or when we don't see a ton of nominees of color. But with Broadway, we actually don't see the same thing. Broadway in many ways goes unregulated. So perhaps we need to start paying attention to live entertainment like Broadway as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm curious. I'd love to hear like a takeaway recommendation from each of you, like a call to action, as it relates to advancing the power of pop, the agenda, as it sort of you get my question. So I'm going to let anyone, you three, take a swing at it.
I mean, I can take a stab at a call to action. As a creator, as someone who's making content, who's connected to, ambitious young folks of color, children of immigrant folks who want to tell our stories, I think what I need from the people listening is we need you to raise awareness when it's time about pop culture and our representation, and to actually support us while we are developing. Go to our indie theater shows, go to our stand-up comedy shows, but, go attend the independent theater showing that one theater that's showing that one film, that's how we develop, because the thing is, Hollywood is not prepared to develop most folks of color. We have to create our own ecosystem and economy to grow as artists, to find audiences. And so if you are a nonprofit professional, if you're an advocate, if you're someone who just cares, when we put the call out that there's a hashtag, or we're live tweeting, Game of Thrones because no Confederate should not happen from the creators of Game of Thrones, hop on to your, tiny, your Twitter account that you say you never use, and just start hashtagging it. Who cares? The more that we can all kind of chime in, this stuff works. And of course, people sometimes argue, oh, representation isn't everything because there are real issues connected. But you all know as practitioners that the power of pop culture is the ability to have a shared point of reference, right? A shared shortcut for articulating a position or an emotion or a story. And I think the more that you can encourage us to create our stories, the more that you could start populating a world where you could refer to maybe the Jenny Yang story, or maybe the Bassam story, or maybe the Carl story, and people know what that means. And we could actually, get people to just quickly say yes to your campaign and yes to your cause.
Yeah. Bassem, Carl, any comments, or you want to take a swing at that question?
Yeah, I actually just want to add to what Jenny just said. I think it's important that we promote and support young artists, people of color at the local level as well. Locally, there's a lot of collectives. I can speak about Chicago because I am a Chicagoan.
Yes.
And I think some of the main challenges are, in addition to exposure, are financial support. We have to support our young artists financially, through exposure, and at the same time challenge the misconceptions that are out there. I think a lot of times, it's okay to jump on a hashtag, and I encourage that. But I think even locally, we have to challenge those misconceptions and continue to support our young rising stars and the young people of color.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Jen. Anyone?
Yeah, Bassem said a lot of what I was going to say around challenging misconceptions. The only other thing I'd add is that there are a lot of these shows portray these misconceptions of immigrants, and we have to stop watching them. And you know, that's like the strongest way for Hollywood to get the message. If we no longer allow these portrayals and these shows to you know, to be part of our popular culture. We saw this happen, you know, for decades. It was pretty common for television shows, for movies, to portray blackface, and until it became unacceptable. And once you know, once it became unacceptable, that changed. And you know, obviously now you know, they started casting Black people, and now we're dealing with that. But I think that you know, we just have to stop being consumers.
I see what you mean. We have one of our final questions here. I think, what is the balance? Oh, this is for all three of you. So, what is the balance that you think needs to be struck between Hollywood needing more storylines, right, that feature more nuanced representations of the immigrant experience, versus the industry needing more storylines that include nuanced sort of images of immigrants without making it about their experience as an immigrant?
Can you rephrase the question? What is that? Sorry.
It came from one of our speakers. I mean, one of our listeners. I think what the question is that, what is the balance that you think needs to be struck between, you know, the industry needing more storylines that feature more nuanced representations of immigrants versus storylines that feature immigrants but without making it about their experience
Per se.
as an immigrant? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, just as a creator, for me, we always need to strike this sort of balance, because I think even in comedy, you know, when you're coming up and sort of making your voice known in the comedy community or in Hollywood, you can get pigeonholed into so many things. And one of the things as a non-white, non-queer, non-able-bodied person is anything that makes you out of the norm becomes your thing. You know, it becomes like, oh yeah, she's that Asian comic, or he's that gay comic, you know? And I think what I find is powerful as a creator is we just have to keep creating, because the nuances only happen if we get a bigger platform, honestly. So if I only get one shot at making my mark and I'm like, hi, I'm Jenny Yang and I'm a political Asian, and I say that all the time, people might take away and say, yeah, that's the only thing that she is. But if I also say, oh yeah, I was on Tinder and I know how to date and dating is hard, then they can see, okay, she's also like, you know, a more well-rounded person. So I feel like it's really a balance that we have to strike. You know, on the one hand, I'm not ashamed of the fact that I'm an immigrant, or I'm Asian American or Taiwanese American, but that's not the only thing I talk about. And we need to allow creators to do that, you know, to both talk about, you know, the stuff that is specific to these identities, but also the stuff that might be more quickly relatable to most people. And sometimes even our communities will criticize sometimes, you know, say like an Asian American performer who doesn't directly address the fact that they're Asian. And I think we need to voice our opinion, but then give them sometimes a little bit of room to breathe and grow and share more of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Carl, Bassem?
Yeah, this is from Bassam. I mean, I agree with everything Jenny just said, but I would like to add, as we explore the alternative media outlets, I truly believe that the true immigrant experience, like I'm an immigrant myself, and throughout the pop culture and what we see in Hollywood, I don't feel like my story as an immigrant is being properly represented. So when we talk about the balance, I believe the balance should be between like the nuanced representations and the real experience of the real immigrant experience that truly lacks from what's out there. And this is something that we need to heavily promote and continue to promote as we create that balance.
Yes.
That's great. Carl?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks again to Lucy, Bassem, Carl, Jenny for sharing their knowledge with us today. If any of you listening have any questions about today's material, feel free to reach out to me or Elizabeth Johnson. We're also going to be sending you a link with this recording as a follow-up, okay, so that you can share with any colleagues who couldn't make it today. We're going to close out the webinar, but as we do, a short evaluation, I mentioned this earlier, a short evaluation will pop up, so please fill that out so we can make sure we're offering the best possible content to partners in the future. If any of you three have any closing words that you want to say, I'm gonna close it up. Bassem, Carl, Jenny?
Yeah, this is Bassem. I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity agenda. Thank you, Michael, Lucy, Carl, Jenny, and everyone who worked on this webinar. And for all the social justice activists out there, my advice would be just social justice is not about picking one issue. Social justice, if you truly want to be social justice advocates, we must fight on every single front, and everyone should pick up that fight, and we need to unite. And especially in this current political climate, the strategy, we know what it is. It's about multiple tactics, and let's just go out there and fight for our people.
Yeah, I'd echo those points, and again, thank the Opportunity Agenda for having us. And I would just encourage people to, the Power of Pop is a report, but I encourage everyone to actually use the use the report to interrogate what we're watching, and to just to use it as an action tool. Don't let it just sit in your inbox and whatnot. Share it with your organizations, and figure out what we can. Let's start thinking about what we can do to shift these narratives that we've been discussing.
Yeah, ditto on all of that. And I just want to say thank you to Opportunity Agenda. As a comedian, as someone who kind of moved from a professional movement person proper to now doing stand-up comedy and entertainment and acting, I think I can't express how important this work is, especially the work that Opportunity Agenda is, and the work that you all can do as social justice advocates. I know the grind. Like, I've been in these nonprofit offices. There's lack of resources. You're constantly doing fundraisers just so that you could meet your budgets and make sure people stay on board as staff, and provide your services. But I urge you to consider this. If I were to wave a magic wand to all of my colleagues I used to work with in labor, in nonprofits, I would say this. Number one, I would love it if, as a part of the strategic training and culture of each nonprofit organization, on staff and in the stakeholders, that critical media literacy and speaking out about representation is a part of what you do, whether whether or not what your organization represents has anything to do with the arts or media. That would be number one. Number two, even though you have limited resources, you also have the challenge of communicating effectively your cause and fundraising effectively. And you all know this, that it needs to be through storytelling. And I would encourage you to consider, what would it also take to use comedy as a way to do that? Also, that means you might have to budget a part of your budget for people who know how to do comedy, for people who are really great at making videos, for people who are dazzling at graphic communication. Like, we need to invest in the artists in our community who can really get the points across in a fresh way. So I just encourage that as my parting thoughts.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks again to all of our speakers, and thanks to you for listening. Everyone have a great day.